My name is Rebecca Luber, and welcome to our webinar today, Building Wealth with Real Estate through Real Estate. We have an exciting topic today and great presenters. Before we get started, I'd like to thank our members and donors of the Alumni Association for powering our alumni webinar series. To learn more about how to become a member, you may visit umnalumni.org/membership. We also like to note that this webinar is brought to you in partnership with the Gold Legacy Home Program, an exclusive Alumni Association member benefit. Visit our website at umnalumni.org/benefits to learn more about the Gold Legacy Home Program and other member benefits. The Gold Legacy Home Program is offered by Tam Laingen and Trey Scott, the North Home team with Keller Williams Premier Realty Lake Minnetonka. All right. We also have some exciting opportunities for folks this month. We are celebrating National Entrepreneurship Month with a wide variety of programming, and you can see that on your screen. This information will also be shared out with everyone afterwards after today. And if you're looking for looking to hire short-term employees for experiences or short-term projects, please look into our projects initiative that we just launched this month. This is where you can find students for short-term projects and experiences. To learn more, you may visit the information on your screen. All right, so if you have questions at any time, you may enter them into the chat box, the Q&A box. The Q&A box will allow us to be able to see your questions more readily so. So definitely use the Q&A box to ask your questions at any time, and we will reserve about 10 to 15 minutes at the end for your questions. All right, so without further ado, I'd like to begin introducing our speakers today. I'll have Tammy come on screen and begin her introductions.
Hey, I'll bring Trey on also just so I can see his face. I interact better when I can see him. Yeah. There he is.
Thank you.
So yes, my name is Tam Laingen. I do want to just start out by thanking everyone for taking the time. I know it's lunchtime. Hopefully you're eating something tasty while we're in here. So our goal today really is just to give you some kind of good nuggets. Walk away with one thing that helps you open up your mindset to different opportunities, things like that. We have a lot to talk about today, and I know Trey and I are going to do our best to kind of put a blanket on some of these things and then do some Q&A afterwards. So a little bit about me is that I started in real estate 8 years ago. I come from a military and medical background. I landed into real estate buying my first house out of the gate unexpectedly within 6 weeks. And then I've been able to kind of learn and grow from there and build as an investor, and then obviously build out the North Home team and doing residential real estate sales. So I am a realtor and an investor, business owner. Certainly all of the things that I have my hand in have something to do with real estate. And I've been doing that 8 years. I love everything that I do. Trey has got a little bit more, I think it's more unique and more fun. I know he says I'm humble, but tell us about you, Trey.
Hey everybody, my name is Trey Scott. I've been in real estate for 13 years. I started out as an investor, having a family investment company. And then I got my license as a realtor in 2010. So it's been 11 years as a realtor now. So I've done real estate, I've done investments, I've done leadership. I'm actually now an international real estate investor and business coach for United Kingdom and London. And so I'm going abroad a lot, but I love servicing Minnesota, and I'm excited to be here and talk about wealth building with all of you. Go ahead, Tam.
Awesome. I don't know if Rebecca wants to jump back in, or can we launch right into this? Rebecca, what do you think?
You could definitely just launch right in.
Awesome. So I just want to point out too, we can't see your faces, so I can see your names in our chat box. Feel free to use the chat box, interact with us. If you have a question, I absolutely encourage you to put it in the Q&A section. That way we can make sure that we're addressing questions that you have. I think we'll, Trey and I are going to chat. We have found that when we have dialogue and personal experiences, that our own selves seem to take more away from that. So we'll have some dialogue. I'll monitor that Q&A box and the chat box, of course. But we'll kind of chat between Trey and I, and then at the end we'll focus more on that Q&A. So if you ask a question, I am sure I see it. You may see my eyes go down there too, but we'll talk more about those afterwards. I'm sure we'll have plenty of time to get to it. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. We're going to try something new today. So bear with me while we open this up. All right, you guys can see my screen. Let's do this. All right, so the main reason that we're all here, right, is to talk about why build wealth with residential real estate, right? And Trey and I have done different things, would you say, Trey, with, yeah. And then over the years, it's kind of progressed, right? Like the things that you kind of get into, the conversations you have, the people you meet, changes what you end up participating in, right?
Correct, yes.
So I think the biggest thing that we talk about with real estate is it's universal access, right? And when I say universal access, I mean everyone buys a home, maybe, or like everyone has access to buying a home. They live in a home. Oftentimes they own it, or they're renting it and someone else owns it, right? So there's universal access. You don't have to have a certain level of capital like you do or cash for other major investments. A lot of the times we say, the people that have a lot of money make more money because they have the money to invest. This is something that everyone can kind of get into. And we're going to talk about how I did that. Not really planning on owning a rental at first, not when I, bought my first house, and I kind of found a way to do it and then slipped into it. And then of course it's more consistent than any other asset class. So real estate, we call it a long-term game. There's short-term ways of using real estate as an investment. But it's hard to take a loss on something when it's a long-term game, right? We always say, like Trey, when we're talking to our clients and you're living a home, if you're going to be there 5 to 7 years, it's usually pretty good. I know we get a lot of questions about the market, things like that. And sometimes it's not good to buy a house short-term because the market doesn't lend itself towards that currently. But generally speaking, it's more consistent than any other asset class that we know about that's got this level of universal access. So I don't know, Trey, anything you want to jump on there with that?
No, this is good. Types of income with real estate. We're going to talk a little bit about all these touch base on these different topics, but as Tam listed, it's a real estate sales career, flipping, long-term residential rentals, short-term VRBOs and Airbnb, which is starting to be a hot market in today's market, right, Tam?
Yeah, oh yeah. Yeah, we'll talk about that.
Commercial and business investing. And this is just a few that we're just going to touch on briefly during this hour. Yeah.
Well, I think, it's easy for us realtors. Trey's a realtor. I'm a realtor. We work in the market every day, right? And the market is living, breathing. We're experiencing it every day. We try to read it. We read it forward as we give advice. So it's always good to ask about the current market. What's happening today? And then we try to read it forward to the best of our ability. But there's so many factors that come into play with the real estate market. So as realtors, of course, it's easy for us to invest in what we know, or it lends itself to be easier to invest in what we know. We're in the conversations every day. We're looking at things that are for sale every day. So it's easier for us to catch something because we're just looking at it all of the time. So when we say types of income with real estate sales, you can certainly have a real estate sales career. Some people have it full-time, some people have it part-time. The thing with this though, is that a real estate sales career is very, it can be direct for a long time. It's not necessarily passive until you've really put a lot of work in. We've seen some really great realtors build passive businesses. We call those 7th level businesses. Usually they'll have a coach, something like Trey, to get to that kind of a level. So there's a way for that to become a passive source of income. However, a lot of people think, it's flexible, that kind of stuff. It's very direct for a while. I'm certainly in the direct part myself in the real estate sales career. I'm out with clients, I'm negotiating, I'm writing contracts. That's not passive income. That's more direct, but it's certainly a way to get into it, right? And then you open yourselves up to these types of conversations, which is what happened to me when I bought my first house. I was not in the real estate game. I was not a realtor. And then I ended up getting into real estate sales and have purchased more properties because of that, more like. So we're going to come back to this one, but I kind of want to jump over here and talk a little bit about that, how I got into this game of real estate. So I'm going to kind of jump here. I'm going to jump forward a minute. So when I got into my first investment, I think this might be a lot of people when they first start having conversations with me, right? It might be somebody that I know, it might be a client, and they say, how do I get my first investment? Or, how do I buy a house and then make money? And that's what we mean by investment, right? Like, how's it going to make me make money? On the top left, you see, buy a new primary resident and rent out the other one instead, right? That's kind of how I first got into the game. I bought myself a townhouse, and then instead of selling it like a lot of people do, I looked at my finances, right? I think the biggest thing here is going to say, have conversations with whoever manages finances, your accountant, your tax advisor, and a mortgage officer, right? Somebody who does financing. When I say mortgage officer, that may mean like your standard conventional type loans, or whoever is giving you the money, right? Whoever your investor is, sometimes the investor is the bank, they have mortgage officers who do the financing for that. So that's how I got into it. I went to them and I said, can I buy the next house that I want? I had this thing called a VA home loan. I could do no money down. And there's some leniency with the VA home loan that I learned about as a realtor, that I could keep my house, not have had it rented out, and then buy the next house and then move into my primary residence. So I bought my next house with zero money down and kept my townhouse and then rented it out. And that's how I got my first rental property, was just instead of buying and selling at the same time, if you can manage both mortgages, if you don't have to have a renter in there and you can move and buy the next one and then turn your other one into a rental property. So I did have to switch mine, right? Trey's familiar with VA loans too. I had to refinance it into a conventional loan because on a VA loan, it had to be my primary residence. So that was a way to do that. Now that my son would be super mad if I moved again and bought another rental property, or bought another property, used my current house as a rental property, he wouldn't like that too much. So what I was able to do though was then take that, anything that I made off of that, save it and put it towards the down payment on a next house. So there's different ways to do this. So I kind of slipped into the game, and that's a really easy way for a lot of people to get their first investment property or their first rental. And those are going to be more long-term rentals. And then, so building from there, right? I want to kind of jump back here. I just wanted to share that with you. I think that's probably a really easy way for people to do this, but it really is making sure you got to have the conversations with your tax advisor and your accountant and whoever's going to lend you the money, the mortgage officer. And I say have those conversations early, even if you're 6 months out, Trey, even a year out, if you tell your tax advisor, just so they know, they can have the right conversations with you about how is that going to impact you when you have income coming in on this property? What should I do about it? How can I set this up so I don't get hit when tax time comes, that kind of stuff. But the mortgage officer is definitely like reviewing your areas, right? Like what can you qualify for? What would you need to have in place? Do you need to have a lease in place? What do you need to have in place so that it opens up your purchase power, is what we call it, right? Your ability to purchase another property at the value that you're looking for. So it's kind of an easy way to do it. And that's more your long-term residential rentals. And we're going to talk to you about short-term VRBO. Like Trey said, that's a big one, and especially in vacation markets. Multifamily, commercial, we're not going to talk a ton about that. Multifamily is going to look like in residential real estate is 1 to 4 units, and then multifamily is 5 or more units. Commercial, those are heavier. You need a lot more capital for those kinds of things. You need a lot more cash to invest in those kinds of things. But certainly starting is where you get your first rental. Maybe it's a VRBO, maybe it's long-term, and we see them just start to build out their portfolios, sell some of their smaller residential things or keep them. But maybe they'll sell them, buy a bigger multifamily set of units, that kind of stuff. So we're going to talk a lot more about, maybe a little bit of flipping, but a lot more like, how do we get a long-term residential rental, which just means like I have a property, I'm going to let someone rent it for 12 months, 6 to 12 months. That kind of thing, not these short term for weeks, for a month, that kind of stuff. We're going to talk a little bit more about that. Oftentimes that's like the easiest thing for people to get into until they start becoming a more advanced investor. Flipping That's more direct also, unless you have a business big enough where you've leveraged it all and everyone is doing the work for you and you're making passive income off of business, but you're going to start out most likely working directly in that business. That's not really as much passive. So we're going to talk about that. So I think the biggest thing, I shared with you how I got my first one. I found a way to do it without having capital. So that's because I had that VA home loan. I'm a veteran, so it was something that we were able to use. However, most people in a lot of situations, they're going to need capital to come from somewhere. Where's the cash coming from? I know that's a question I get a lot. And again, it's building a team, right? I think when people start to become like investors, if they have properties that they own, you got to build a team around you. And my team, and Trey, you can chat about who's on your team perhaps, but mine is definitely my financial planner. It's definitely my tax advisor, a realtor, me. Sometimes it's me reaching out to other realtors though, because it's good to have a second opinion. And then whoever gives me the money, right? Who's the money person? Mortgage officer, small bank, private investor, that kind of stuff. Trey, anybody else that I'm missing? Those are the people that I talk to the most.
Well, for me, how I started in my first long-term investment 13 years ago was my primary person was my family member, was my mother. And she was the one that watched the info commercial on make money fast investing. She called me and says, I want to invest into real estate. And at the time I was working 2 jobs. And so we started just finding properties. We did have to put, 5-10% down. But what she did was she went to savings. She went to her 401k, and also she did get some mortgage loans. And one of them actually was a seller that the property was paid off, and that seller actually lent the money to buy the property too with interest free. So we had an actual seller that did the financing for us. So, when we talk about a team, yes, tax advisor, financial planner, also, like I said, the people around you, there may be from a spouse to a family member or even a business partner, someone that wants to build a portfolio of investments that you can also share that cost with, especially if you have someone that are contractors, because they can help fix up properties, and also people that does property management too as well. So that's what it means by having that team, that core team of people to help you with that.
Trey, I love that because you're right. Everybody's business looks different, or the way they make money looks different. And so we get a lot of these conversations, and it's like, we just got to sit down and look at what's your time, energy, and resources? Who's around you? You might have access to things that I don't have access to. Certainly my perspective is a lot of my investment is just on me. It's just me. You know this, Trey, which could be my downfall in the long run, right? I need to spread my wings and bring some other people in. So certainly, I love that. It's other people that and you and I have worked closer together as we've built relationships and having conversations with people, that kind of stuff. So I love that you point that out. It's absolutely share with people. I know you coach a lot. Share with people what your goals are. What is your intention? Even if it seems like it's far away or not obtainable today, you got to start having the conversations, because you'll be surprised what shows up. When you build relationships with people, you start being around people, things start to become more realistic. They start to fall into place, right? I know someone just asked you, like, how accessible are these opportunities to normal people, those that aren't already wealthy? I love that you asked that question. That's kind of what we're going to focus on today, not these like higher level investments. They do happen, but these ones are down here. Like you started with a family member. I started with just moving into a primary residence. I do want to point, let's talk a little bit more about that. That's kind of a great segue into how do we build capital? Cash from a job, right? Cash from a job would be like, let's say me, right? I sell homes, I get commissions, I save some of those commissions and I put them as down payments towards properties or businesses or whatever. But so cash from your job. Anybody that has like a regular 9-to-5 kind of job, that can be tricky, right? To save up. Some people will do side jobs. Some people will do different things. It's important to make sure that you're paying income tax on that money. It's hard to use money that's not being taxed, right? So it's always making sure that. I know a lot of people sell things, that kind of stuff, but make sure you're talking to whoever's giving you the money about where that money is coming from as your down payment when you're purchasing. So cash from a job, that's kind of the easiest one to say, right? Or if you're selling things, if you've got a side gig, money from there. An investor, right? If you've got somebody, have conversations with people. If you can find the opportunities and someone else has money, but no time to find opportunities, partner with the person who has money. And certainly we can chat offline about, okay, where do you find those people? Where do those people hang out? Certainly a realtor knows lots of people in the real estate industry. So that could be a good place to start too. But ask us that offline too. I think those are always good questions. But investors, an investor is also a bank, right? So it can be a private investor, it can be a big financial institution. They can sometimes give you money. When we do creative financing, we'll call it like not your standard 3.5% down FHA or a 5% conventional, that kind of stuff. That you're going to need your down payment money. Smaller banks, credit unions, private investors, they can be a little bit more creative about how they get money to you or how much you need down to purchase. So having conversations with investors, but always read the fine print. Read between the lines. The other person I have in my back pocket, we just don't talk as much, hopefully, usually, is a lawyer. I don't want to have that many conversations because they are expensive to have conversations with. But always read the fine print. If something seems like a really good deal, start to ask some questions. Have conversations with somebody else. Have them get their eyes on it before you sign something about where am I getting money from? How much is that money going to cost me? That kind of stuff. Or using current assets. That's another one too, right? We'll talk a little bit about that too. So some people will take money if you've got money in CDs or stocks, things like that. I have conversations with my financial planner. I put a certain amount of money into a CD because I can easily take it out, but it's going to make money for me while I'm waiting for the next opportunity to show up for me to purchase. And my financial advisor knows that, it's like, I need this money to go in the place that I can take it out with the least amount of ramifications. Or what do you already have? The biggest asset a lot of people have is their current house. Sometimes we see people refinance their house, take money out of the house they already own to use as a down payment on their next property. Of course, doing that costs money. So make sure you read through the fine prints. What do these things cost me to originate another loan? What does that cost me? So oftentimes we're going to talk about one of these opportunities. Like if you're going to, let's say you want to buy a vacation home. You want to buy a home in Florida. We see that quite a bit, right? If you've been in your home for a long time, you have a lot of equity but you don't have cash. It's all in your, sitting in your assets or sitting in homes or properties, that kind of stuff. You can refinance one of those, pull money out, but just make sure that when you're doing your numbers and seeing if it makes sense, that you factor in how much it costs to take that money out of your current asset. What are the tax implications if I take this money out? What's it going to cost me to take it out? Those kinds of things. So you want to make sure that you answer all those questions before you write an offer on a property and get yourself into one of those things.
And to add to that, Tam, don't forget from even your job aspect, some of us still get a big tax return. So use the tax returns every year and put that into, I always say I have an investing account. We talk about a lot about, putting money aside into savings accounts. Well, have a separate investment account. Start building that investment account just like you're building a savings account at the same time, because investment account is the one that's going to be there to invest and make more money for you. And the savings account is there to save. So that's how I kind of separate it and start putting that money aside from taxes, from job, everything into that investment separate account just for investing. Yeah, absolutely.
And so that's where really, once you purchase a property, then you're renting it out, it's making income, obviously. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. So to answer this question, right, like how do normal people or people that maybe they have a house, that kind of stuff. Let's say if I wanted to get into my first investment property, but let's say I'm ready to move, or maybe I'm downsizing or I am upsizing. When you buy a primary residence, your primary residence down payment can be as low as 3%, 5%, 3.5%, whatever those might be. They're not 20% down. A classic like direct purchase investment property is going to be something like 20% down. And then different, of course, in multifamily and in commercial, but the down payment is a lot less if you're purchasing a primary residence and also having conversations about vacation homes. when you're purchasing it as a vacation home, is it only 10% down? That's where it's really good to start having conversation with the lenders. I don't know what normal people are either. I don't know what that means, Barbara, but it was just a question that was asked. Opportunities to normal people or non-wealthy people, or I'm not sure what wealthy necessarily means either. I guess I was just answering the question, but certainly access, right? I guess I'm thinking large millionaires, that have access to a lot of money. They could easily purchase a bunch of investment properties. So just knowing that, right, it's one of those ways. The other one, I think, is the easiest way to start building out your first rental is like Trey was talking about when we were at the U of M game. When we were out there, someone came up and you had a really good conversation with them. And it's one we have, it kind of like is one of those mind-blowing kind of things. You want to share with us about that?
Yes, because I actually did it for years, especially when I was just a single individual man and, had no family yet, was for a long time, with single family homes or even a townhome, I used to purchase it and rent it. I would rent the room out or rent the basement out, to other people. And those 3 people living in the basement or in the rooms, they were paying my mortgage every year. So I had an individual student, just a graduate from U of M, approach me, at the last game. And I asked him, I said, so, where are you living right now? And he says, oh, I'm renting and I have 5 other roommates. And I was like, okay, let me talk to you for a second. For one thing, a lot of times, if you can qualify to rent, if you have the credit to qualify to rent, a lot of times you can qualify to buy with that credit. And a lot of buyers don't know that. So that's the first thing. The other, especially if it's a primary home like this student, that's an FHA, first time homeowner, that's 3.5% down. That's a low down payment. That's probably how much he's paying to put down for deposit for rent. And so what I told him was, why don't you purchase a property, a townhouse, and take those roommates, and instead of paying, all of you are paying for someone else's mortgage, you let them rent from you and let them pay your mortgage and bring your equity down in that property, and you live there just like you do now. Because if you think about it, students and other individuals right now, they're renting, they have roommates, they live in basements. And one of them, even a parent, remember, Tam, we talked about this.
Yep.
Parents, if you have students and your students are renting right now, have roommates, another property, they're paying someone else's mortgage. Why not you purchase it and let them pay your mortgage down and create equity for you? That's such a very easy investment when you can use other people to pay and you still live there. So
yes, yeah. This is such a great, we've had a lot more conversations about this in the last several years than I ever had before, which is my child is going to college and we want to purchase an investment property so that they can rent it out to their friends and then we'll have it. And it's an area that they end up knowing well, maybe they, especially, a lot of people that are at the U of M, their kids go to the U of M, the areas that you're looking in, so the market, the properties, that kind of stuff. Which is such a good way to kind of start that first investment. You can add them onto the property when you purchase it if you want to. But again, make sure you have conversations about what does that mean, right? When you add someone onto a property, if you're making money on it, how does that affect them, their taxes? So it's making sure you have all of these conversations. But it's definitely a way to get in, especially when an immediate family member, there's different rules and things like that, right? Different family, when an immediate family member lives there, or especially when you live there, and to help build credit, build out, businesses for people right out of the gate, like your kids, right out of the gate, or if you just know the area well and you want to rent to students, and that there's always going to be people renting there. And especially when you have larger bedroom sizes, things like that. You've got a lot more people paying in there. I think with that, we should touch on this too, Trey, is the other person that's on your team and from our own personal experiences is making sure your property manager, right? If you feel comfortable managing the property, make sure you know what you're managing, have conversations with people about their experiences with it. I was a little too nice. So me now is definitely, I factor into my formula somebody who's going to manage that property for me. It just was not my strong suit. So I think, Trey, you can agree with that, right? Just making sure that you factor that in to your formula when you're looking at numbers and making that make sense.
Yes, and some of my investors that I help purchase, I actually manage their properties all over, and they just like the fact that they work with someone that helped them find a property and then manage it. And so the thing is Tam's right. It's easier to be an investor. It's harder to be a landlord.
Mhm.
There's a big difference. And I know a lot of people that wants to be investors, but a lot of them do not want to be a landlord and have to
Right.
kind of deal with the challenge of the day-to-day of managing the property, managing the tenants and the expectations and everything. So if you can, and it's not a substantial investment, it is worth getting a property manager
Mhm.
to manage your investments. It really is.
Right. And I mean, if you have investments now, I mean, factor this, start having those conversations, because the goal, all of this is to make your money make money for you. And if you're actively working in it, it's not totally passive, right? So there's still some directness that's attached to that, right? So my goal is to leverage so that I don't have to deal with it. But make sure it's in your formula on the front end if you can. And if you already have some and you're feeling this, so you're relating to this conversation that we're having, start to see what it costs and start to factor it into your formula. And then see if your rental market lends itself to you changing your formula so that you can have that, so you can leverage, so you're not dealing with it. So that's the biggest goal, right? Is start leveraging these things. I know, Trey, you and I talk about this because leveraging has been hard for me as just a business owner, but it's how you start making money truly passively. Is when you're not actively working on it. And being a landlord and doing your own property management is actively working on it. I know I had a question come up in here. Can you rent a house to my adult child and their family who's not a dependent and get all the tax benefits of being a landlord? So yeah, if you're getting income, it doesn't matter who it is. You can absolutely, right? Like you're getting those incomes. It's always, that's why I always say, make sure you have a team so that you guys know everyone's financial situation is very unique. That's why it's super hard for Trey and I to answer these questions, and we're not qualified to do so. Your tax professional who looks very specifically at your taxes and your information will tell you the best way to set that up. But absolutely, yep, if they're not your dependent, you buy a property, like let's say if I was gonna buy let's say I bought my mom a house and she was renting it from me, absolutely. Mm-hmm. You're just a landlord to your, immediate family members.
So I do
or
want to
extended, I guess, at that point.
I do want to give advice on that. I treat your immediate family members, friends, whoever you want to rent it out as, potential tenants, investors. Do your due diligence, treat them just like you would anybody else that wants to rent. Do the background, whatever, even though you know them, that's great. But you still want to treat your investment property, no matter who you're renting out to, as you want to do it professionally and make sure that everything is financially secure. So you know that you're going to get your rent payment every month. Because the thing is, and I've experienced this with a family member, when something happens, now you feel bad, and it's harder to try to collect rent from a family member if they're not paying for whatever situation.
Mhm.
And so you always want to treat your investments as an investment property, no matter who you rent it out to. It's very, very important.
Yeah, those are kind of our nuanced things, right? As you start to experience this in real time, those things start to show up for sure. So we absolutely have resources like for background checks and things like that, but absolutely. So it's always have the conversation with whoever does your taxes and say, hey, I'm thinking about doing this. What do I need to make sure that I have saved up for taxes? How is this going to benefit me? How will it affect me? Make sure you have those conversations before you make the decision to purchase. I always think that's the best thing to do so that you don't get surprises. I think what takes a lot of people out when they want to build wealth is that they don't have these conversations on the front end, right? And then they never get a chance to have passive income because something takes them out that they didn't consider beforehand. They just think, oh, I got the money, let me go buy a house, and then I'll figure it out as I go. Somebody else just asked on here, what do you think about buying a condo unit as an investment with the intent to rent it? I look at condo units the same as I would anything else. The biggest difference is there's associations, right? If there's an association, make sure you read all the rules before you sign a contract to purchase, and also know that at any time that association could change the rules. Sometimes you get grandfathered in, sometimes you don't. You can certainly look at the history of it, but there's always this risk that the association could change the rules. Trey, what do you think? I think that one just jumped out at me right away because those are great opportunities too.
Yeah, I agree. And also take in consideration, there is condo fees, and based on the amenities
Yep.
that that condo has, it could be higher. So what you want to look at when you're looking at investing a condo is that rent payment going to cover not only the mortgage, but
Mhm.
also what part of the condo fee is going to cover? Because now you have
Yep.
two payments, different types of payments that you're looking to cover in order to get the cash flow for that condo.
Yeah, that's a great point, right? I think too, and somebody else asked a question here, I'll touch back with that. As we're talking about we're in Minnesota here, so I don't know if everyone is in the lovely state of Minnesota. We're starting to get a little cold here, but the condos here aren't like condos in, let's say, Miami, Florida, or Tampa, Florida, something like that. A lot of those condos are set up with the rental capability, like short-term rental capabilities, right? I'll admit, that's kind of where my head's at right now, right? I want to buy my next investment property somewhere warm so I can use it part of the time and then rent it out part of the time if I'm not using it, or charge family or friends to use it, something like that, right? So that's another option, right? Buy a vacation home and then rent it out when you're not using it, so that you have somewhere to go all the time. And the condos down there are going to be very different. Oftentimes those are set up to do temporary. They're kind of set up for VRBO, or vacation rental by owner. That's what VRBO stands for. They're kind of set up like that, or they'll have an association or like a hotel. Essentially, you're buying a condo in a hotel and there's a whole company that already manages everything. I love that idea, because then I don't have to do anything. I just have to make sure that I factor all of that into my numbers when I'm going to purchase. How much are they going to take? But they're going to offload all of it. I don't have to pay for a cleaner, any of that stuff. That makes it truly passive. But then I also have somewhere I can go and it pays for itself. I don't have to pay for it. I just need to rent it out enough times of the year for it to pay for itself. So that's a really great way to do that too, right? I can buy a vacation property. If I'm going to be down there 6 months out of the year, I can do way less on my down payment, purchasing it as a second home, stay there 6 months during cold season. And then when it's nice up here in Minnesota, I'm not there, I can rent it out, right? That's a great option. VRBOs is another option, right? And so, yeah, I just think the condo market's just different depending on where you're looking at. But in Minnesota, the condo market doesn't really look like that of like a high touristy area. Those might have different opportunities for you. But like VRBOs, right? Vacation rental by owners, those are truly short-term rentals. You can manage a lot of this stuff. The apps, the websites that they have out really make this like applicable to so many people that don't have background in it. But just know that they oftentimes can make more money, but they oftentimes have more expenses. So it's making sure, and sometimes you have to market, you are dealing with turnover more, you're dealing with different people, cleaning companies, that kind of stuff. So that's definitely a unique market to kind of start tapping into. But just know that you really truly get what your expenses are and what your profits are, so that you can make sure it makes sense, because the profits are going to look higher short term often, but the expenses are definitely going to be higher also. And the likelihood of something going wrong, breaking, you have all these different people utilizing your space versus just one person for a year, 2, 3 years, that kind of stuff. Trey, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, and remember, I mean, we're in Minnesota. This is the 10,000, 15,000 lakes, right? So I know some of you, and if you don't, you're thinking about having a lake house or going up north, having lake, in Duluth or something like that. Don't forget that that's a great investment as well. I know that, you go up north some seasonal times to spend time on the lake, but then when you're gone, you're back home, you can still rent that property out. Just like you said, VRBO it. I've seen Lake House now or Airbnb. Like I can go to Airbnb right now. I can find all types around Superior and all different lakes of lake houses and log cabins, and everything is Airbnb too as well.
Yep.
So there's great opportunity to have that dream vacation home that you've always wanted here or anywhere. And still, I love the fact that the vacation home can pay itself.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Let me say it again. Let your vacation home pay itself. So it's free to you by renting it out when you're not there seasonal, and let them pay that mortgage. And it's now you have a free vacation home, right, Tam?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And when you get started in these things, oftentimes you're going to be the one managing it, right? You might be managing the website. You might be making sure if you've got a good relationship with a cleaning company, making sure they get out, you're scheduling it. maybe your first one, if it's close enough, you're the one turning it over. But as you get to like 1 to 5 units, maybe, or separate units, you might start hiring someone else to take care of these things for you, which would just, the more you leverage, the more passive these things become. But always make sure it makes sense with your profit and loss sheet. Because, you know, when you own these properties, it's hard to sometimes shift our mindsets into, I'm a business owner now. Do I need to have an LLC? What do I need to do to protect my assets? And then also protect my personal assets, my own home, that kind of stuff. So that's why I always say, make sure you have a team of people that you're having conversations with, because the last thing you need is somebody, buy your first rental property or transition to a new home. You have your first rental property and then something go wrong and they come after all your personal stuff. So it's just making sure you're having the right conversations, lawyer, tax advisor, all that kind of stuff that we were talking about. Somebody asked a really good question in here. Is this a good time to buy properties as the prices are almost $100,000 compared to last year? So my answer, anytime it comes, I'm a numbers girl, so this might just be too basic of an answer. But as long as the numbers make sense, because the rental market's not slowing down anytime soon. So if my formula makes sense, my money down, what is my expenses, what's my income, all that, as long as the numbers make sense to me, it's a good time to buy. So you just got to make sure, you don't necessarily want to wait, because then, I see people wait and then 3 years later, they've only gone up and they lost 3 years of equity. So, and again, right, it's a long-term game, but the biggest thing I think to pay attention to also is like vacation markets. What happens in Florida, right? In Minnesota, we don't have as much of that, but like in Florida, they have tornadoes, that's a Minnesota thing, hurricanes. So some in seasonality, different things that happen in these areas, they can wipe out areas, and it might affect your rental income for a while, right? So, and that doesn't necessarily have to do with what the house costs today, but making sure that your numbers make sense and being aware of the risks, because they're different in different states. Here in Minnesota, I know we've got this seasonality and this temperature, but we don't have hurricanes. We do have tornadoes. I said that wrong, but that can do some damage on some places, right? If you have all your vacation properties that you rent out are all down in Tampa, Florida, and then a hurricane comes in and wipes out Tampa, Florida, there's a giant risk there, right? But absolutely, I think to answer that question is just making sure that the numbers make sense for you. Because does your rent make sense with the cost? And are you cash flowing what you're hoping to cash flow out of it? That kind of stuff. Does the market lend itself to people renting there? If it is a VRBO, does it make sense? You can't just buy a VRBO anywhere on a lake in Minnesota. You're good to go, probably, right? That's a pretty safe bet that it's going to rent out in the summertime, maybe less in the wintertime, but make sure you're planning around that, right? And the more that you start to get more investments and or more properties, that kind of stuff, the more you can start to leverage these things so that they are more passive than directly being in them every day. Somebody asked a great question. Will we be addressing passive strategies like the real estate investment trusts? We're not going to talk too much about that today, because that's a little bit more on like just putting money into investments like you would on the stock market, that kind of stuff. Great opportunity. But here we're going to talk a little bit more about how you can actively just like purchase properties and be actively involved. Those are great. There's no material attachments to those types of investments. Certainly passive though. But that's a great question. Another really great opportunity to do that too. Let's touch base. Someone just said clarification on like buy, rehab, refinance, and renting. That's a way to buy a property. So when we do BRRRRs, is what they're called, we always have to make sure that the lending world is allowing us to refinance and pull cash out. Because for a little bit here during our COVID time, the lenders weren't doing a lot of cash out refinances, were they, Trey?
No. Yeah, not at all.
So that was something you gotta have conversations, because these things change. Lending rules are always changing. Tax rules are always changing. Laws are always changing, which is why Trey and I are not capable of answering all of these questions, and you've got to have a team. So this is a great option. It was a lot more common, probably, gosh, would you say 10 years ago? But certainly not in the last 2 or 3 years. So you buy a property, but the idea is that I'm going to buy a house that needs some work. Sweat equity is what we call it, right? And we're going to rehab it. So we're going to fix it up. And especially like you said, Trey, if you're a contractor, someone's a contractor, you have that resource, this might be an easier investment for you or an easier place to put your money, because you have someone who won't charge you as much for labor, or you can do it yourself. So the numbers might make more sense for you specifically. So they'll buy the house, needs a bunch of work. Maybe it's one of those old foreclosures back 2009, 10, when I bought my first house. Foreclosures nowadays just look a little different. Not the same market, right? So fix it up, and then we refinance it at the higher value, pull our cash back out and use it to buy the next one. And then we just rent this one. So we hold this property. You can also sell it, but it costs a lot of money to refinance, right? So it may not be a good idea to refinance if you're going to sell it. So normally people are only going to refinance that if they're going to hold it, because they don't want to pay for all the costs to refinance it. So buy, fix it up, refinance it, pull your cash back out that you used to buy it as a down payment, and then use that money on the down payment on the next house. And then you rent this one out, right? And then we got to factor in the cost to refinance though on the front end. So you know that when you're refinancing, I got to put those origination charges on there, all that, whoever's doing your financing for you, whoever's giving you the money. So that would be the BRRRR concept, usually when they're renting. If they're flipping, truly flipping, that's that short term, that's a little bit more direct unless you get big enough to build a business that you have somebody else managing it and you're making passive money that way, right? These things can all get big enough to be more passive than they are direct, but that would be it. Then you're renting it out, right? And then you get your money back when you're refinancing. Good question on that one. This direct purchase investment property, that's at 20% down. You got to have enough capital to buy those, and then you just rent them out, right? You're not transitioning. There's no one renting in there with you. You're truly just buying, you're investing, you're not going to live there, which is kind of more where I'm at now, right? I'm not going to move. I'm going to stay put so I don't have to move my Legos. And I got to have the money, wherever it's coming from, to buy the next one so I can rent it out. But then it's having conversations with the right people. And I say this too, like, Trey, you let me know what you think. I mean, private investors, but somebody who doesn't know a bunch of people who have money to do things with, have a good relationship with a smaller banking entity. They usually, the way they hold or sell their loans and portfolio their loans is different. So especially if you have a relationship with them and a specific person, I'm more of like an in-person kind of, I want to have a relationship with you. We're going to talk. They trust you. They know you. They're more likely to give you financing that doesn't look like your basic standard 5% down, 10, 20% down conventional type of loans. So there's lots of different opportunities to find investors, whether it's a smaller bank or a private investor, but just read the fine print when you do that. Good question. I know someone else had another one. Can you comment about downtown Minneapolis area for rental? Is it coming back? Also around the University of Minnesota rental homes, crime going up, current and future investment opportunities in both areas. I think if you're in the downtown area, we saw this big boom. We can always speak to sales, right? Crime, I would definitely check the police maps. We have resources where people can look into those things. I always say, drive around the area, like whatever your level of comfort is with whatever's happening in a neighborhood or area. But we did see a big boom, but I think a lot more of that had to do with the amenities being closed down in Minneapolis. And the condos like pay for all these amenities and I can't use any of them. So more people wanted space. They were in their homes more. So we saw this kind of like sprawl outwards because of COVID. Trey, would you agree with that?
Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah.
And it's bouncing back up. It's definitely bouncing back because I'm gonna be honest, when people move to Minnesota, especially you still have people that loves the city life, they're looking at the Minneapolis area and, during, around the lakes and things like that and downtown. And so it's still a great investment in Minneapolis, but there's different types of, and there's different policies and everything about rentals and conditions of properties. And, that's something we might have to take off because that's another hour of Minneapolis. But they do have different codes and everything. So when you start really investing in Minneapolis, make sure that like us, you have professional real estate agents that understand what is the codes and all the different requirements in order to have a rental property in Minneapolis.
Yeah, Trey, that's a really good point. So there's a big difference with renting a property that you live in and you're living in there and renting it out to other people. There's different state laws, city rules, that kind of stuff, versus when it's truly you're not living in there at all. Absolutely what Trey is saying is check with city. It's oftentimes city specific. So renting in Minneapolis is going to look different than renting in St. Paul, then different than renting in Minnetonka or Bloomington. So make sure you check those, right? How do I get a rental license? All of those things before you purchase, right? It's like, do your homework. That's the biggest thing I can say. It's going to set you up for success in the long run if you do your homework on the front end. Because you got to factor all those things in, getting a rental license, paying for inspections, anything that might need to be repaired. Those are all expenses now, right? And we need to make sure that whatever you're purchasing is going to cover those expenses. And in the long run, it's going to make sense for you and you're going to make money and it not be a loss or something come up that you weren't expecting. So, but absolutely, I mean, I think we see it. I was just in Minneapolis, for a concert, and things are starting to open. Minneapolis, why people love it, why I love it is the amenities, right? And they're starting to open back up. Things are starting to events, activities, the life that was in Minneapolis that kind of went away for a little while because it lost all of its amenities is starting to come back. So we do see people heading back into Minneapolis when they lost all their amenities, right? So we saw some people not wanting to rent anymore because why pay the rent? Because rent is very high. They're gorgeous places to rent. But if you don't have any amenities, why pay for it? And people are starting to head back in because of that. But same thing, right? So current, future investments, like that kind of stuff, right? I always say, look at where commercial developments are going in. If you're looking for like an up and coming place, where are they putting commercial money in? Where is that light rail going? That was a big one for a while. So checking those things, but absolutely, I think as amenities continue to open up in Minneapolis or any urban area, right, where you have all the shows, orchestra hall, all these different things. The restaurants are opening up. All of our favorite restaurants are down there. All the fun stuff happens down there. The games, we start to see Minneapolis life coming back. And then people want to be back in there and near and pay the cost to live there because they can access all those things again. And they couldn't for a long time. So that's a great question. I actually get that question a lot. So I'm glad that you asked that. Another question here, you briefly touched on this, but owning a duplex and purchase as a primary residence, but have since bought another house and are renting out both sides of the duplex now. Wondering about converting your duplex into an LLC. And if you do that, do you have to refinance a duplex loan or is it easy to just switch the name with the lender from your name to the LLC? So that's a great question. A lot of people will purchase. I mean, again, this is probably a good place to talk to a lawyer. I will always say that. I have a good lawyer on my side as well, a real estate attorney, just to run these questions by. And whoever is doing your loan has their own specific stipulations. Generally speaking, and like I said, always follow up with your team on this. I do, put my investments into an LLC as a protective layer for my personal assets, right? But anytime we change like the conditions on our loan, right? It's like me as Tam Laingen took out a loan from so-and-so. If I'm changing the ownership over here to a different company, I need to know what the ramifications are, right? At any time, oftentimes with mine, so I'll speak to mine, they may call that loan forward if I change the ownership on it, right? Which means it's due. Until you build up money, if you have business credit, that kind of stuff. But oftentimes we don't when we're getting started in here. So make sure you have those conversations, check with how your loan is set up. If I do change the name, or if my LLC is only in the names of the owners that are on the house already, some people who have properties will do LLCs for each individual house. Some of them will do them all under one. It just depends on what makes the most sense for you. But it's certainly a good question to ask. I mean, I personally do it to protect my own personal things. In the state of Minnesota, if you own property, a house, and you're married, they both own it. If it's under an LLC, then the business owns it. So you also need to make sure that if something were to happen to you and you're the only one on the LLC, what happens with that LLC and that property? So just make sure you have those questions. I definitely think that's an avenue to pursue, in my personal opinion, but make sure you have conversations with people about what does that mean, right? And then switching it over, the basics of switching something over in terms of a name, there's no sale. You do a quick claim deed for something like that. My attorney does my quick claim deeds for me. And that part's pretty easy, but just make sure you know what you're getting into before you do something like that. But without asking any of the questions, right? If the basic steps to just switch it over to an LLC is a quitclaim deed, but just make sure you know that your loan might have some stipulations on there.
And
So really good question.
keep in mind that when you become an LLC, you become a business. So just like Tam, she has a team, she has a tax person, because that means your LLC has to file as a business every year. So remember, this is not just switch it to LLC, it's also you're running a business now. So what is the tax? What do I have to file? Because now I have a company to run and manage at the same time.
Yeah, Madeline asked a great question. Why would someone want an LLC per house versus an LLC for all the houses? Excuse me. Again, I would definitely ask like the specifics of like their financial situation. It just kind of depends. Like unless you have the same people buying the houses and it's all the same people under that one business, sometimes they're different. But I know that some people do LLCs per house, but there's a lot more paperwork with that. I just think about that. There's a lot more paperwork that you got to file all these LLCs. You got to renew all these LLCs. Certainly there, and again, you want to talk to a lawyer, but when people have these conversations about doing that, it's to protect each individual house under its own LLC. There's so much more paperwork involved. And if you miss the renewal of one LLC, so there's a lot of paperwork. There's more tax things and paperwork you have to do for that versus just putting them all under one. But if you have different people on different properties, you probably want a separate LLC for that, because an LLC is a business, right? So it's who owns the business, you have articles of incorporation, who's involved in ownership. And so if it's all like you and if like me, it's just me, then it might make more sense for me to just have them all under one. So good question. Sometimes it's just to protect in each individual asset, but just know that there's more paperwork to it. And some people don't like doing it and some people do. But really good question. Yep. Somebody also asked, how are deals involving private investors generally structured? Are the mortgages held by the private investor? So private investor is a term that a lot of us use. It can mean so many different things. Like maybe you have a private investor that is giving you the down payment for the loan, and then you have a different investor who's giving you the loan, like a bank or something like that. So they're all structured very differently. When we think private investor, I think like me, I could be a private investor. If I've got cash and you want to borrow some of it, but I'm going to charge you a certain amount of interest rate, then we're going to have that conversation. That can be structured any way we want, right? And that's why I also think, Trey, you make sure you read the paperwork. Have a lawyer at least review those documents if you're not used to reading them, because they can be a gamut of things. It could be anything, however you want it set up. But smaller banks, people that do this, or even I've purchased some properties from some investors who that's what they do. They just do CDs or contract for deeds and stuff like that, which are great opportunities, but just make sure you read through the fine print. So I wish there was like a basic answer for that, but it's usually some kind of interest rate. There might be a balloon payment. So you might have to pay it all back at some point within 5 years, who knows, but it really could be the gamut of things. So always make sure you read through the lines on that. It's like basic standard investors, big banks, Huntington Bank, they're going to have stipulations. They're definitely have lots of laws that consumer regulations and things like that protect them, but private investors are a little different. Would you say that, Trey? Like it can be kind of the gamut of things.
Yeah, it is hard. There's hard money lenders, but they do mostly flipping, because what they do is they lend you the money quickly. You're putting a lot down for them for you to flip it, hold it short term, and then pay them right back. So there's different types of investors based on your needs.
Yeah, I know we're running short on time here. We had some really good questions, and I just kind of want to review different types of businesses that are very real estate specific, right? Land development, commercial leasing, construction, brokerage ownerships, if you want to own a Keller Williams, make passive income that way, and ancillary businesses, title companies, inspection companies, radon companies, coaching companies, interior design companies, flooring. I mean, like everything under the sun that's involved with the house, HVAC companies, you can be a part of that. You can have ownership in some of them. You can start them and have some. So there's ways to do that too. I just wanted to kind of point that out as we moved through some of this. And the last thing I really want to say, and somebody brought up these real estate investment trusts. use the money that you make to buy another property. Put that money somewhere where it's going to make more money for you, right? And maybe that is like they brought up, this real estate investment trusts, stocks, mutual bond, like any of those things that you have access to that you put money into, make it make more money for you. A lot of us will save the money we make and use it as a down payment on the next house, right? But maybe you don't want to do that. Just make sure you do something with it. Don't let it sit in your checking account. Any financial advisor will tell you right now, you got to spend your money right now. And make it go somewhere. So that's kind of the biggest thing, is just make sure you're reusing it. Make sure it has a place and a home to go to. But yeah, so we kind of answered the questions as we went a little bit here, but if you guys have any extra conversations, questions, reach out to us individually. I know a lot of people have specific situations, but feel free to call, text, email Trey or I anytime. We're happy to have a conversation with you and answer any specific questions that you might have.
Great.
So
I know,
Thank you
Rebecca, we're,
so
yeah.
Yeah, no worries. This was all great information. I was also taking my own notes myself. Really appreciate your time and energy and the knowledge that both you and Trey bring to us. So afterwards, I'll be sharing the recording with everyone who's registered for today's webinar, as well as the contact information that you see here and any other resources that I shared in my earlier slides. So thank you so much, everyone, for your time. This concludes our webinar. Have a great day.
Thank you, guys.
Bye.
Okay.